let's pick up two things. One is inflation and the second is jobs. Now, before we come to that, let me just take you through the 10, just so that we're all on the same page, the 10 mantras that Modi has put out. One is building confidence in bureaucracy. Second is education, health, water, energy, and roads. So broadly, infrastructure, physical and social. The third is a mechanism for the interministerial issues. Fourth is addressing concerns about the economy. Fifth is stability and sustainability in government policy. Broadly, working better with bureaucrats is the next one. Then the transparency in governance, infrastructure and investment reforms, and implementing policy in time-bound manner. So before we get to that, do these 10 points give you the confidence that they will address these issues like inflation and jobs, which are some of the most critical issues, as you yourself have pointed out?
Well, I think I will divide these 10 points into three broad categories. I know that's stretching it, but I think it's still
sure.
To do that. One is motherhood statements, which is addressing concerns related to the economy, reforms in infrastructure and investment areas, reviving confidence in bureaucracy, health, water, education, roads, energy, priority areas. Now, these are statements of intent, priority, but really nothing in terms of concrete action indicated as to how any of these things are going to be addressed. That's one. No problem there. This is a government that's not even a week old. Let's not get too ambitious about specifics here.
Right.
Second, which I think is very important, is the bureaucracy issue, the process issue. Those I think are very, very significant. There is focusing on innovative ideas in the government and work freedom for officials. If you're able to do that, I think that will make a huge difference to the government. But what does it mean in terms of incentives, appraisals, rewards, penalties, things like that? That needs to be fleshed out. Two is of this category is the sorting interministerial issues through efficient system. Now, I have a very concrete suggestion to make here, which is not reflected in the 10 point, in the specific point, which is that the basic problem with interministerial coordination is the time it takes for ministries to respond to proposals floated by other ministries. It's almost an endless time frame, no control, no predictability, and anybody at any point can veto the whole thing.
Right.
So I think what we do concretely here is to say, look, if Ministry X gets the proposal, everybody has, depending on the scale of the proposal, a month, 2 months, 3 months at the maximum to respond to it. Or if you don't respond to it, you're out of the game. You cannot raise an issue later on saying, sorry, we have an objection to this, but we couldn't get it in to play on time. Forget about that. If they're able to introduce this one simple measure, it's a very, very difficult measure to enforce, I know, but it is a very simple measure to conceive. I think that will make a huge difference to coordination, and I think they've got to push for that. And then, of course, the 10th point, executing policies in time-bound manner, that's a bit of a motherhood statement. Everybody likes to say that. But if you're able to improve this coordination issue, I think execution will immediately benefit from that.
So, Subir, I'll come to the inflation and jobs thing in a moment. Let me get AKB's point of view here as well. AKB, if you were to look at these 10 points, now, obviously, we have only that to start with at this point of time, nor should we expect too much. Does it dissect and thus break down the fundamental problems that have afflicted the functioning of the government, which in itself is seen as responsible for some of the larger problems, including economic slowdown? Right. Okay. I think we've lost AKB there. Let me come back. Subir, let me come back to you, and we'll circle back to AKB when we get him. So the next question, which sort of flowed from your answer, was now how does this fundamentally address the issues of inflation and jobs, which in our earlier conversation, where you had listed as some of the key issues that need to be tackled by this government?
Well, I just want to complete my point about three categories. E-auction, very significant. I think actual concrete step, bringing e-auctions into government procurement. I think that nobody can sort of quibble with that. I think that would make a fantastic difference to the efficiency of the government procurement system. But let's leave it at that. Jobs and inflation, nothing specific. Reforms in infrastructure and investment, yes, that's related to both inflation and jobs. But what exactly are the reforms? We don't know. So let's hope that these get fleshed out in terms of specific actions. And the second is health, education, water and energy are obviously related to inflation and also perhaps to jobs in some way. But there are really, these are, as I said, the statements of intent, which I'm quite comfortable with, I would say. But to translate intent into results, you need to have an action plan, and this is too early in the game to be thinking action. So let's wait and see how these priorities, how these agenda items get translated into specific actions. I think what this does is to force ministries, and I hope they will respond to this pressure, to design their action plans in a way which directly links up to all of these priorities. That's the sort of framework which hopefully will be put in place by articulating the priorities in this fashion.
Right. Okay. There's a question or rather comment from Swaminathan. He says ministers will start going to office now during UPA2. Half the time the then railway minister was in Bengal. So anyway, so I mean, this is obviously, I mean, it's part fun, it's part serious, but is there a larger issue of ministerial focus and you know, and focus of energy and commitment, which was an issue perhaps in the past because there was no clear administrative tightness, which perhaps might be there now, and will that make a difference, Subir?
I think there has been this whole thing about the PMO, you know, basically taking on the responsibility for all important policy matters, and also the expectation that the PMO structure will now be much stronger and deeper in terms of its ability to control other ministries. But you can't have the PMO substituting for ministers. I think that's a very important fact or a point that we have to recognize, that a strong PMO and a strong minister complement each other. That is the best possible combination to get things done. A strong PMO and a weak minister or indifferent minister, or somebody whose focus is on other issues, doesn't necessarily translate into effective implementation. And of course, the worst possible combination is a weak PMO and a weak minister, and you know that is something that I think most people are ruling out in this dispensation. But the best combination is strong PMO, strong minister. I think in areas where we have that combination emerging, we will see the maximum progress in terms of reforms and action and implementation. But we've got to be sure we've got to ensure that this is as broad-based as possible, that it doesn't restrict itself to just a few domains.
Right. So, Subir, I mean, we spoke immediately when it happened, but I mean, now that I'm sure you've had a chance to look at it, you know, we've seen now the merged ministries and several, including transport. Now, transport and shipping. Now, is this a sign that, not a sign, I mean, is this something that is giving us confidence that things would be done differently? I mean, the fact that we've at least have some merged ministries as opposed to more, I mean, as opposed to, let's say, maybe the ideal situation that was expected?
Well, I think it certainly indicates intent to restructure government in a way which minimizes the sort of turf battles and jurisdictional conflicts and so on. But it's work in progress, I think. You know, there is some sign that the government intends to do this, but I don't think in the 1 week that we've had to observe it, that the process, and again, you know, I think we're just getting carried away with the need for speed here. You know, I just to sort of cite a popular video game. It doesn't happen this way. There has to be thinking, there has to be design, there has to be consultation, there has to be, you know, all kinds of stakeholders being sort of appeased in some fashion. So intent and action, there is always going to be a lag. First signs on ministerial integration, I think, are sort of promising in terms of intent, but weak in terms of delivery. I certainly would have liked to see a much greater integration in the rural development, agriculture, food domain, but we don't have that. And I think, you know, issues like commerce and so on, where we have a huge role or a huge stake in the WTO process, the multilateral negotiation. We need a senior minister looking at commerce, not a minister of state. I think, you know, whoever the person may be should have the stature that puts him or her very much up in the ministerial hierarchy, because there's a global role there. All our commerce ministers, if you look back for the last 15, 20 years, have been relatively, you know, people of high profile, and all of them have played some role visible role in the whole multilateral negotiations. I think we need that kind of continuity there.
Okay.
But as I said, this is work in progress. I am presuming that this is not the final form of the government, that there will be chopping and changing, some streamlining, some rejigging. Let's wait and see how that plays out.
Right. So, Ashok Bhattacharya, I think we've got him back. AKB, the question that I was asking you was, looking at these 10 points, is this giving you a sense that this government is ready to engage with the right problems that in some ways were responsible for some of the larger issues of the past, including economic slowdown?
Govind, the way I look at these 10 points is that these are points that nobody can really have quarrels with. These are essentially, as Subir said, these are motherhood statements. Most of them are motherhood statements, and you can't really quarrel with them. Of the 10 points, what struck me as quite forward-looking and showing some commitment to bringing about change is the stress on promoting e-auction to push transparency. That I think will be the easiest task for this government. The framework is already in place in different ministries, but my understanding is that e-auction as a route, e-tendering, is something that was not being pursued vigorously. And I think that will bring about quick gains, efficiency, productivity, and also better decision making with reduced human interface. The second,
yes. Go ahead,
Yeah, the second point is which I thought was very important, but is fraught with problems, is ensuring work freedom for officials. Now, it's a good idea because if you think one of the problems the UPA government faced was policy paralysis, which was made worse by bureaucratic apathy and bureaucratic fear of taking a decision and getting into trouble. Now, for that you need legislative change. You just don't need the minister coming and saying, "Listen, take action, take decisions, and I will defend you." That is not good enough. As long as you have a CBI which is given directions by the Supreme Court to do many things. So therefore, the two specific commitments of the promises the 10-point agenda makes, one to my mind is easier to implement, which will bring immediate gains. The other one, mere statement will not be enough. You need legislative change to back up your promises.
Right. So when you say legislative change, AKB, where again, I mean, we are looking at a large set of problems that, and I'm talking about economic and maybe social as well, which of course is historical too. Now, where would you like to see the quick changes? I mean, again, 100 days seems to be the time that most people are giving to this government to show demonstrable, not change perhaps, but demonstrable action.
Everybody is praising this government for taking things very seriously and doing things with great speed. But let me point out to two announcements or indications that have come through from different ministries. One is Mr. Munde's ministry. He has talked about that there is no need for changing the land acquisition law.
Yeah.
I think this is a retrograde move. I think it is necessary that there are issues with the land law, the way it has been framed, and it is understandable that the BJP was part of BJP supported this law when it was passed by Parliament, but now that it sees that industry is facing major problems with this law, it should be pragmatic and take a quick look at these clauses which are creating problems. Now, if you have a minister who is saying that the land acquisition law is absolutely fine, no need to revisit it, it's a negative signal.
Okay.
The second point is Mr. Gadkari has made a statement that there is no need for any regulatory structure for the road in road sector. Now, to my mind, that is also a retrograde statement. So, if you look at what the government needs to do, you already have a list where the government should not move on those areas. Government should not be acting on those lines. So forget about new things that the government should do, remove retrospective laws, this and that. You already have got two statements that these ministers have made, which will cause some concern.
Right. So, but AKB, the question here is now these ministers have all come. I mean, many of them have held similar positions in the past. So, are they saying things which perhaps they would have otherwise? But they all are likely to either move away from or review once they all sit down with the Prime Minister, and then obviously things are brought back to brought back to line, so to speak.
Well, that will be that is what we should hope for. But then Mr. Nitin Gadkari himself has got a business background. He should understand the importance of a regulator in a complex sector like the roads. Now, if you do not have a regulatory structure there, and the kind of problems that you have seen, do you want the ministry and the ministers get into this sector to settle disputes, the kind of disputes that you have seen in the last few years, and the road sector progress has been very tardy. Now, if a minister makes that kind of a statement, and it's the first statement, and he makes that statement with a lot of confidence and commitment. Now, I feel that it will take a lot of Mr. Narendra Modi's persuasive power to change Mr. Gadkari to what is the correct line, which is the road sector does need a regulatory structure.
Right. Okay. Subir, let me come back to you now. AKB, there's a couple of questions that have come in on which are in pursuance to what you said, but let me come to Subir first. Subir, logically, one next big inflection point will be the budget. Are there any key expectations that you feel the budget can take forward, given what we've defined so far?
Well, I think there are 3 or 4 critical fiscal, let's say, milestones that this government needs to meet. One is complete transparency, which is that it has to be very, very sort of firm in declaring the situation as it is. What exactly is the fiscal situation? It may be exactly what the government has, the previous government has left. It may not be. There's a lot of perception. There's a widespread, or no, it's not widespread. It's fairly widespread that there's a lot of the commitments have been postponed and so on to show a better fiscal situation. Let's put that behind us and let's just get on with identifying what the real size of the problem is. That's one. So budget number that actually reflects the fiscal reality. Second is strategies to get to grips with the problem. Cap on subsidies, I think overall cap on subsidies, which had been proposed in the 2012 budget as part of a new revived FRBM. I think both the revival of the FRBM and the specific cap on subsidies is an important element. I think the government has to announce at least its intent to move in this direction, perhaps with the 2015 budget schedule in mind. Third is, how do we get more money into capital spending? The 10-point agenda mentions reforms in infrastructure and investment. One element of that is more money, and certainly the government, I think, has to be finding ways of getting more money from its side into the kitty, at least in the short term. Over time, we can look at models that bring more private capital in, but the framework is broken now, and I don't think we can move directly to an alternative without the government putting in a fair amount of money. So that's number 3. Number 4 are all of the reform agendas that have been spoken about for so long, GST, DTC, and so on, which are really going to put the whole tax framework that the country has into a different kind of level, and I think it's very important for us to be moving very quickly in that direction.
Right.
The GST has huge advantages, which we've experienced with the VAT at the state level, which is there's an incentive for people to sign on. It's a self-enforcing tax, and it is a very powerful force. We've seen that with the VAT. I think the same thing will happen with GST. The incentive to evade will go down because of the GST. And I think we need to see that happen. So it's a very full fiscal agenda. And some of that has to be implemented in the budget. Some of it has to be announced with some credibility. I think that's what I'd be looking for in the July budget.
Right. So let me again try and attempt to link the 10-point agenda with some of these points. AKB, if I can come back to you, GST in DTC and at least GST, for instance, of course, there's already been hints to that effect, but it obviously requires a lot of coordination at a national level rather than just interministerial, which itself, as you point out, could be a challenging start point. So how do you see some of these areas moving forward?
Well, GST does require the state's participation in full, but I don't think it will be a problem, or it will be so point with most of the states, because our understanding is that the groundwork has been completed. The broad understanding has been reached on how, barring petroleum, everything else can be covered under the GST framework. So I don't see much of a problem. The IT backbone, which is a key deliverable on any GST system, is something that the states will have to create. Now, a state which does not create that IT backbone to support the GST transactions, so to say, will be the ones who will not be able to take full advantage of the new taxation system. So I don't think, given the pace of work that you have seen in the last 3 days, the kind of consultation that the new finance minister has had with his team and with some of the state representatives based in Delhi, our understanding is this: work on GST has gone on in full steam, and you will see some announcements and some new deadline which will surprise us positively. That is on GST. The second point that we understand is that on the retrospective legislation, which was a problem area, which as many people believe was a starting point of the UPA government's decline as far as its credibility with the investors was concerned, is being handled. And as we talk, we understand the Vodafone lawyers are in consultation with the Ministry of Finance, and most probably the company will be withdrawing its arbitration notice, and things will move on, and you will see resolution.
Is that breaking news?
Well, you can say that. You can say that. So that's the advantage of talking to somebody from the newspaper.
Okay.
So I don't see, I mean, but the big point which Subir mentions is that it is very important for the new finance minister to present a budget that is credible, because for the last 3 years or so you have had budgets whose numbers have not sounded very credible, for the simple reasons that they don't take into account the actual spends that have been actually have to be incurred. So you have to account for the real the burden that the government has committed itself to under subsidies head or whatever. So I think the budget has to have that credible ring to it. And number two, the budget must give a clear game plan for what the government needs to do with the financial sector recapitalization, because as we understand, the financial sector requires, according to some estimates, almost around rupees 8 lakh crore of extra capitalization over the next 5 years. Now, either the government doesn't have the money, so the government will have to put in place a kind of a ownership structure for the public sector banks, which allows them to access the market in some way or the other, so that the government's burden in capitalizing comes down substantially, so that money is free for the government to do things that the government needs to do, which is in health, education, and basic infrastructure.
Right. So AKP, there's a question for you from Mr. Raman, I think, if I've got that right. He says, what are the list of positive things the government can do without legislation? Since you made a reference to legislative backing for many of the things that are many of the things that have to be done.
Well, there are a few things which is, if you want to move on to a kind of a project mode of execution is one thing which doesn't require any legislation. which is if you have 365,000 crore of projects which are pending, waiting to be cleared. All you need to do is to appoint a person or identify a person in the system and say that, look, this is your job. I want these projects to be cleared in consultation with the state governments, where many of these clearances are stuck, and give a time frame and get those projects off the ground. So it's a more of a project mode work. Second, I mentioned about e-auction. The law is already there, and if you can influence the ministries and tell them that from this date onwards, all your transactions, whether it is consumer facing or industry facing, you have to go do it through online methods. You are immediately reducing human interface. You will eliminate corruption to a great degree. And I think efficiency and productivity will be the major gains.
Right. Okay. We're coming to a close. Subir, let me come back to you with a question and a sum up for you. The question here is, what are the specific items the government should seek state chief minister support for urgently, and how tough will this be with the non-BJP led states? That's the question which has come in from outside. The other question that I have is that amongst these 10 points that we've looked at as a starting point or at the starting block, which of these would you place the most importance on, or which are the one or two which you would be which you would place the most importance on, which gives you the sense that, okay, when we reconvene to have our next discussion in maybe a few weeks' time, things would have started moving?
I'll answer the second question first,
sure,
which is number 8, at least as far as the list given by the Business Standard goes. Since Mr. Bhattacharya is there, I can refer to his paper. Sorting interministerial issues through efficient system.
Yeah.
That's the starting point. I think that's the fount, because that's where many of the problems have got compounded and reinforced. So if there's some signal on how this is to be done, I would be very pleased with the first few weeks of this government. The others are all, as I said, intent, but need to be fleshed out in terms of action plans. And I'm willing to give it some more time on that. The first question, obvious answer in terms of the fiscal coordination is an agreement with state governments on the constitutional amendment needed for the GST. Now it is I suppose somewhat ironic that the two state governments that have been the most resistant to it are Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, both by the BJP. So let's see how that plays out. Now, if the Congress-ruled states start to, change positions, having supported earlier, now saying no, we won't do it, I think that reflects political immaturity. But bottom line is, you need only 50. You need 50% of the states to approve. And I think you don't need to worry too much about getting all of them on board. The amendment can go through with a 50% approval, and that's what you need to focus on. Go after the guys who are least resistant, get them on board. But on other issues, I think two things that we need to be very focused on. One is food, the movement of food. There was some reference in the in the build-up to the government being formed about Essential Commodities Act and its amendments and so on. I think that's very important. I think we have to have a national market for food while keeping in mind the concerns, the food security concerns of states. But we are far too restrictive in terms of our movement on food. That requires state coordination. And two, obviously, between pairs or groups of states, the water issue is going to be very, very acute. We're already seeing signs of that in Andhra Pradesh with the Polavaram project. Interstate coordination on water has been a huge weakness in our federal system. I think that's something that this government needs to get focused on.
Right. Okay. AKB, to come back to you, today there was a news report saying that the new Prime Minister is working 12-hour days. I remember seeing a report a couple of years ago which said how former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was working 18-hour days. So in general, are we still at a slightly hyped up mode when it comes to expectations and so on, or do you see that settling down?
No, I think we are still very much in a hyped up mode, and I think sooner we get out of that mode, better for this government, because the burden of expectations is still very heavy, going to be turning out to be heavy for this government, and sooner it comes to terms with that situation is better for this government. 12 hours of work I think most professionals do that kind of work. So, and as you rightly said, Manmohan Singh used to work for 18 hours. So I think we are in a bit of an unreal situation here. So it's time that we got down to the reality.
Right. On that note, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us and outlining what you think are the key challenges ahead for this government in picking up from those 10-point agenda and taking it forward. And of course, we have the next 100 days to watch and the budget somewhere in between. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be back on the India Hangout.